I still remember the exact way my mother said it. Not to my face, of course. She never said the quiet part to my face. She saved that for the neighbors, for the church ladies, for anybody who needed to understand that her daughter Claire was useful in the way a charger cord is useful. Claire knows computers, she would say, smiling like it was a small, slightly embarrassing hobby. She helps people when things stop working. That was her version of me. Not an engineer, not a systems architect, not the woman who designed the infrastructure behind one of the largest transaction networks in the country. Just the girl who did computer things. And for years, I let them say it. I let my family call me whenever their Wi-Fi blinked red, their printer froze, their phone stopped syncing, or somebody clicked on a suspicious email that promised a free cruise to the Bahamas and delivered 5 pop-ups and a migraine instead. I was the one they called when the TV remote disappeared, when the laptop just died, when someone forgot their password for the 4th time in a week. I was their unpaid IT department. At family dinners, while my cousins bragged about their bonuses, their promotions, their new houses, my mother would pat my hand and tell people, "Claire is still figuring herself out." Figuring myself out. That phrase haunted me. Because the truth was, I had figured myself out years ago. I knew exactly what I was good at. I knew exactly what I had built. I knew exactly how many nights I had stayed awake in a tiny apartment with cold coffee and a laptop, designing systems most people would never see but everybody would depend on. I just didn't have anyone in my family who thought that counted. Until the night everything changed. Until the night a billionaire walked into my life, looked straight at me and said, in front of everyone, "You built my company." And every person in that room turned to stare at the daughter they had spent years overlooking. That night didn't just expose the truth. It burned my whole old life to the ground. I grew up in a house where image mattered more than reality. My father liked to be admired. My mother liked to be praised. And me? I was supposed to fit neatly into the background and make everybody else comfortable. My brother Jason got the compliments. He was loud, charming, athletic, the kind of son my parents loved to introduce to guests. My sister Dana had the kind of polished smile my mother adored because it looked expensive. And me, Claire, I was the quiet one. Not shy, quiet. There's a difference. Quiet people notice things. Quiet people remember details. Quiet people hear what everyone else thinks they said privately. I heard my mother call me the technical one, as if I were a household appliance. I heard relatives ask whether I worked with computers because they never knew how to properly define what I did. And every time I tried to explain, I could see the polite confusion settling in their eyes. So I stopped explaining. At 16, while other kids were learning how to drive or worrying about homecoming, I was teaching myself code, not because it was trendy, not because I wanted to sound smart, because I loved it. I loved the logic of it. I loved that a system either worked or it didn't. I loved that if something broke, you could trace the failure, isolate it, fix it, and make it stronger than before. That made sense to me in a way people sometimes did not. I started with free online tutorials. Then I moved to late-night classes. Then community college. Then scholarship applications. Then internships. Then freelance projects nobody in my family understood. They thought I was wasting time. My mother once asked me, very seriously, wouldn't it be better to learn something practical? I remember staring at her and thinking, what do you think I've been doing? Because while she was telling the neighborhood I was between things, I was helping small businesses recover from data loss, tightening their security systems, optimizing their databases, and building back-end architectures that let them scale without collapsing. I was working with people who knew my value because they had seen the results. My family only measured value in titles they recognized. If it sounded glamorous, they liked it. If it sounded technical, they tuned out. So I learned to keep my world separate. I told them I was in tech. That was enough for them to nod and move on. They never asked what kind of tech. They never asked what I actually built. Maybe that's why it hurt so much when they acted like I was invisible. Because I had become very good at making things work for everybody else, while nobody made room for my own life to work for me. By 27, I was no longer figuring myself out. I was already there. I worked remotely as a senior infrastructure architect for a fast-growing fintech company. Most people would never know my name because the systems I built were not supposed to be seen. They were supposed to run. And they did. I designed the backbone that handled millions of transactions every day. The kind of architecture that needed to be fast, secure, resilient, and nearly invisible. The kind of infrastructure that had to survive spikes, outages, attacks, and the kind of pressure most people only read about in corporate articles after a disaster. My work lived in redundancy layers, latency optimization, failover strategies, secure authentication flows, distributed processing, and disaster recovery plans. Boring words to most people. Life-saving words to the people who needed the system to stay alive. I loved the challenge. I loved solving problems before anyone else knew they existed. I loved the satisfaction of watching a complex system hold under pressure because I had built it to. And still, when I went home, I became the family tech support. My mother would hand me her broken phone before I'd even set down my bag. My dad would ask me why the family printer hated him. Jason would text me, "My laptop is being weird again," which usually meant he had opened 18 tabs, downloaded 3 sketchy apps, and ignored every security warning on Earth. Dana once called me from a restaurant because her card got declined and she wanted to know whether the bank was doing that thing again. I fixed everything. Not because I wanted their approval. At least that's what I told myself. Maybe part of me still hoped one of them would look at me and say, "Wow, you really built something." Instead, they acted like I was just handy. I got the same level of admiration as a good power strip. Still, I told myself it was fine. I had my own apartment, my own savings, my own career, my own quiet little life. That should have been enough. And for the most part, it was. Until my company announced a major expansion, and my boss forwarded me an invitation to the annual industry gala. "Bring your spouse or a guest," he wrote. I didn't have a spouse. I didn't even have a serious date. So I thought maybe I'd bring my friend Lena, who understood tech enough to not glaze over when I talked about load balancing, and who had the great skill of making me laugh at exactly the right time. But then my mother called, and that was where my mistake began. "Claire, listen," she said, in that tone she used when she had already decided something for me. "We have an important event the same night." I sat down at my kitchen table. "What event?" "Your cousin Melissa's engagement dinner." I closed my eyes. "Mom, I told you weeks ago I had a work event. You can miss one thing for work." "Actually, I can't." A pause. Then the sigh. The deep, offended sigh of a woman who believed the world should arrange itself around her priorities. "Claire, family comes first." I almost laughed. Family comes first. Except when I need support. Except when I need recognition. Except when I need anyone to care about what I do. "I'm sorry," I said carefully, "but this gala is very important." "Well, maybe they'll understand that family is important too." Something in my chest tightened. Then she said, "Besides, it's not like you're receiving an award or anything. It's just a work party." A work party. I looked down at the invitation in my hand. Black textured cardstock. My name embossed in silver. My CEO had called it one of the most influential industry gatherings in the country. To my mother, it was a work party. I should have ended the call there. Instead, I said, "Fine, I'll try to stop by the dinner first. She brightened instantly, like she had won something. Good girl, she said. Good girl. I hated how that landed. The night of Melissa's engagement dinner, I walked into my parents' house carrying a bottle of wine and a polite smile that felt glued on. The house was full already. My mother had gone all out. Candles, floral centerpieces, fancy glassware that nobody in the family normally used. The kind of event that was less about celebrating Melissa and more about demonstrating to the world that our family was, at least for one evening, successful enough to host a nice dinner. As soon as I walked in, my Aunt Linda looked me up and down and said, "Oh, Claire, you made it. I was worried you'd be stuck with some computer emergency." I smiled. "Nope, just me." My cousin Melissa squealed over her ring. My uncle asked me whether I still worked with IT. My mother introduced me to a neighbor as our Claire, the one who knows all about computers. I almost corrected her. Almost. Then she added, "We don't really brag about her work. She's modest." Not brag about my work? I nearly choked on my own breath. I stood there holding a glass of sparkling water, trying to keep my face still, while my mother casually reduced my career to a personality trait. Then the doorbell rang. My dad opened it, and suddenly the room shifted. A man entered wearing an expensive navy suit, no tie, the kind of quiet authority that doesn't need to announce itself. Tall, immaculate, expensive watch, calm eyes that took in the room in one sweep. The room went silent in that awkward way people do when someone important enters, and nobody knows how to behave. My mother straightened immediately. "Mr. Harrington," she said, fawning so hard it was almost a bow. "We're so honored you could come." Daniel Harrington. Yes, that Daniel Harrington. CEO, investor, media darling. The face behind one of the largest financial technology empires in the country. The kind of man whose decisions moved markets and whose companies handled impossible volume every second of every day. My mother looked like she'd just been handed a royal audience. "We met at the charity board luncheon," she said rapidly. "You were kind enough to say you might stop by." He nodded politely, but his attention was already moving through the room. Then his eyes landed on me, and paused. Not a glance, a pause, a real, deliberate pause. I felt every muscle in my body tighten. He stared at me like he was trying to place a memory he couldn't quite reach. Then his face changed. Not much, just enough. Recognition. My stomach dropped. Before I could even ask what was happening, he crossed the room straight toward me. Every conversation in the house died around us. He stopped in front of me, smiled once, and said, clear as day, "Claire?" My mother blinked. "You know my daughter." The billionaire looked at me, then back at her, and said something I will never forget as long as I live. "She designed the infrastructure my company runs on." Silence. Not polite silence. Not awkward silence. Total, absolute, catastrophic silence. My mother's smile froze in place. My father frowned like he had been told gravity was optional. Melissa actually dropped her fork. And Daniel Harrington kept going. "In fact," he said, "she designed the architecture for our transaction layer, our failover systems, and the security backbone that supports hundreds of millions of transactions every day." He turned to me with real admiration in his eyes. "We've been trying to get you to join our executive advisory board for months, and I had no idea you were right here." I remember the strange sensation of the room tilting, because suddenly, every person who had ever called me just the tech girl was staring like they had been handed a new dictionary. My mother laughed, not because anything was funny, because rich, uncomfortable people sometimes laugh when their whole worldview cracks in half. That's wonderful," she said weakly. "Claire is very good with computers." I almost laughed at the understatement. Daniel smiled, but there was nothing amused in it. With respect, Mrs. Whitmore, this is not good with computers. This is the architecture behind one of the most critical financial systems in the country. There was a beat. Then he looked around the room and added, if this infrastructure goes down, millions of dollars can be lost in minutes. What Claire built is the reason it doesn't. The room had no idea what to do with me anymore. I could feel my mother's gaze on my face, trying to recalculate who I was now that someone important had named my value out loud. That was the moment I realized something very important. Some people do not believe you are real until a man with a title says so. And that honestly made me furious. Daniel asked if he could speak with me privately, and my mother practically pushed me toward him. Of course, she said too quickly. Claire, go on. As if this had always been her plan. As if she had not spent years making my achievements sound like minor household repairs. He led me to the study, where the music from the dining room blurred into the walls. Then he turned and said, I need to know something. I folded my arms. That sounds ominous. He actually smiled. Did you know who I was when we first worked together? Yes. Then why did you never mention that you knew my company's systems inside and out? I exhaled slowly. Because in my world, people usually care more about whether you can solve the problem than whether you can name the founder. That hit him harder than I expected. He looked at me for a moment and said, my systems team told me the architecture was brilliant. I wanted to know who was behind it. They told me your name, Claire Whitmore. And when I asked for a background report, I found nothing obvious tying you to the company except a remote contract through a consulting firm. I nodded. I was hired through a subcontractor. I did the design work. The company didn't need my face. They needed the system. He leaned back and folded his hands. That system saved us during the last outage. You know that, right? I did know. Our transaction volume had exploded faster than expected. A lesser architecture would have buckled under the pressure. My design held. We rerouted traffic, maintained redundancy, and recovered in under 9 minutes. 9 minutes in my industry is either a miracle or a catastrophe, depending on where you stand. He looked at me carefully. There's more to this than you're saying. It wasn't a question. I hesitated, then decided there was no point pretending. My family thinks I do tech support, I said. They don't really understand what I do. Daniel stared at me for a second, then said something very quietly. That is a very expensive misunderstanding. I laughed before I could stop myself. Yeah, I said. You could say that. He studied me with an expression I couldn't read. Then he said, Claire, I'm not here to embarrass you. I'm here because we need you. Our expansion in the Asia-Pacific network is going to require a complete infrastructure overhaul, and I don't trust anyone else with it. My pulse kicked up. Why me? Because you already built the kind of system most engineers only talk about in conference presentations. He paused. And because you're the only person who understands both the architecture and the consequences. That should have felt like a job offer. It felt bigger than that. It felt like being seen. We went back to the dining room, and everything had changed. Not in the dramatic movie scene way where everyone suddenly claps or gasps loudly. Real life is uglier than that. People don't always react with one neat emotion. They react with denial first. My mother tried to salvage her dignity by telling Daniel, Claire has always been very resourceful. Resourceful. My uncle asked whether I had gone to one of those coding boot camps. My father asked how much of my work was actual engineering, and how much was support stuff. I wanted to disappear. Daniel, to his credit, did not let the moment become a spectacle. He simply said, there is nothing small about the system she built. Then he turned to me and, in front of my entire family, asked if I would join him at the charity keynote next month as a featured technical consultant. Featured. Technical consultant. The room nearly broke, because there was no way to translate that into "she just does computer things." My mother's face went pale, and then the worst part happened. She smiled. Not a real smile, a survival smile. The kind people use when they realize the truth is no longer optional and they need to pretend they knew it all along. "I always knew Claire was gifted," she said. That almost did me in. I looked at her and thought, "No, you knew I was useful, but I didn't say it. Not then. I was too busy trying to understand what was happening to my life." The next week, Daniel's office sent a formal invitation for me to join a strategic technical review team. My mother was suddenly fascinated by my schedule. She asked questions she had never asked before. Where exactly did I work? What exactly did I design? Was it true I had saved the company during the outage? Did I do cybersecurity too? Was I making a lot now? Funny how respect arrives right after the paycheck gets impressive. At dinner one night, my mother said, "I just never wanted people to think you were bragging." I nearly dropped my fork. "Bragging about what?" I asked. She blinked. "About being successful." "Mom," I said very quietly, "you've spent years telling people I'm the one who fixes the Wi-Fi." "Well, that's part of it. That's not even close to the full picture." My father cleared his throat. "Claire, your mother means she didn't want to put pressure on you." "No," I said. "She didn't want to feel embarrassed by a career she didn't understand." Nobody said anything. That silence was the first honest thing in my childhood home in years. Then Jason, who had been scrolling on his phone until that moment, looked up and said, "Okay, but seriously, can you fix my laptop after dinner?" I stared at him. He grinned like nothing in the world had changed. I stood up, took his laptop, and said, "No." The whole table went still. Then I added, "But I can give you the name of a very good service center." That was the first time in my adult life I set a boundary with my family. And it felt better than I expected. The real reckoning came at the next public event. Daniel invited me to a company summit where he planned to announce a new payment expansion and introduce the people behind the platform's success. I knew my work would be mentioned, but I did not expect what happened next. The room was full of executives, investors, media, and engineers. The atmosphere was polished, sharp, expensive, the kind of room where people exchange power and smiles. I wore a dark dress, simple but elegant, and kept my posture calm even though my nerves were alive like static. Then Daniel stepped onto the stage and began speaking. He talked about scale, reliability, trust, security, the invisible architecture that keeps modern commerce alive. Then he said, "No company survives at this level without extraordinary people behind it. One of those people is Claire Whitmore." My breath caught. He introduced me to the entire room, not as an assistant, not as a consultant, not as a helpful woman who knows computers, as the architect. The room applauded. It should have felt triumphant. Instead, I just felt strangely calm, because for once, my work was standing in the light where it belonged. After the applause settled, Daniel invited me on stage. He handed me the microphone and said, "Tell them what you built." I looked out over the crowd, and for a second I thought about every person who had ever made me feel small. Then I started speaking. I explained how the transaction framework was designed for resilience. I described the distributed processing layers, the redundancy nodes, the automatic failover, the real-time monitoring, the security protocols, and the reasoning behind every choice. I spoke like I always wished I could at family gatherings without having to make myself smaller to fit into other people's comfort. And the best part? The room listened. Actually listened. Not because I was loud, because I was right. Afterward, journalists came up to me with questions. Engineers shook my hand. Executives asked for my card. A few women in the audience told me they had never seen someone explain infrastructure in a way that made them feel proud of the invisible labor behind it. That meant more to me than I can say, because I had spent years doing work that was essential but uncelebrated. And now, finally, the room understood that the most powerful systems are often the ones nobody notices until they fail. I wish I could say my family immediately learned their lesson. They did not. People rarely transform that quickly. My mother became dramatically supportive in public, which is its own special kind of exhausting. Suddenly, she was saying things like, "Claire has always been brilliant," and "We're just so proud of her," in a voice that sounded like she was trying on a new scarf and checking the mirror. My father asked whether I might take a look at his retirement account, which was hilarious because he still did not understand what I did. Jason started introducing me to his friends as my sister, the genius. That was new. Dana tried to act like she had always believed in me, which would have been adorable if it hadn't been so obvious that she was just trying to stay on the right side of the story. But I had changed. That was the part they couldn't control. For the first time, I stopped rushing to rescue everyone from their own incompetence. I stopped over-explaining my choices. I stopped shrinking to make people feel taller. I accepted Daniel's offer to lead the infrastructure expansion. I negotiated my contract properly. I got the title I had earned. I hired a team I trusted. I moved into an office with my name on the door. My mother nearly fainted when she saw it, and I realized then that respect from other people is nice. But respect from yourself changes everything. Months later, at another industry event, I found myself standing beside Daniel when a reporter asked how I got started. He glanced at me, but I answered for myself. "I built things because I liked solving problems," I said. "I stayed because I realized infrastructure is one of the most underrated forms of power. People notice the products, the brands, the headlines. They rarely notice the systems that make all of it possible. But behind every smooth transaction, every secure login, every instant payment, there's a structure holding it up. That structure matters." The reporter smiled. "And your family? Did they always understand what you did?" I smiled back, a little sharper this time. "No," I said, "but they do now." That was true, even if it was only partly true. Understanding the job was one thing. Understanding the woman who had built it was something else entirely. And for me, that difference mattered. Because the same girl they had dismissed as the one who did computer things had quietly built a system that powered hundreds of millions of transactions a day. The same girl they had not bragged about had stood in a room full of executives and been named as one of the most important minds in the company. The same girl who had been invisible at her own family table was now being asked to shape the future of an industry. And the best revenge? It wasn't humiliating them. It wasn't screaming. It wasn't revenge at all, really. It was becoming so undeniable that the truth could no longer be hidden behind their comfort. It was walking into rooms where they once underestimated me and knowing I belonged there completely. It was hearing my mother introduce me differently now. Not as the tech support daughter. Not as the girl who fixes things. But as Claire Whitmore, engineer, architect, leader. The woman who built the backbone. Months after that night, I learned something that should have been obvious to me all along. Being seen is not the same as being understood. My family saw the money. They saw the title. They saw the attention. But they still did not fully understand the years it took to become the woman they were suddenly proud to claim. And honestly, that was the part that hurt in a different way. Because once people realize you have value, they do not always respect you. Sometimes they just get more creative about using you. That lesson came faster than I expected. It started with my mother calling me on a Tuesday evening. "Claire, sweetheart," she said, in that overly sweet voice she used when she wanted something expensive without sounding like she wanted something expensive. "I need to talk to you about something important." I was in my apartment, barefoot, eating takeout out of the container, reviewing technical documents on my laptop. I paused. What is it? Well, she said, your father and I have been thinking. That was never a good sentence. When your work comes up now, people listen, she continued. And I think maybe it would be wonderful if you helped your brother with his business. He sat back. Jason! Of course. What business? I asked, already suspicious. He's starting a digital marketing company, she said. He just needs a little help with the systems. You know, setup, security, website, all that computer stuff. I closed my eyes. Here we go again. Mom, I said carefully, Jason doesn't need a little help. He needs an actual CTO, a lawyer, an accountant, and probably a business plan that exists in reality. She made a dismissive noise. You always make things sound complicated. No, I said. They are complicated. Well, couldn't you just get him started? And there it was. Not a question. A request disguised as a family obligation. I stared at the wall for a long second before answering. Is Jason asking me himself? A pause. Then, he said he didn't want to bother you. I laughed once, sharp and dry. That is the most dishonest sentence anyone in this family has ever said. My mother sounded offended. Claire, Mom, he has bothered me since we were children. That is not fair. You know what is unfair, I said. Acting like my career exists only when somebody else can benefit from it. She was quiet then. That silence told me I had hit something real. I kept going. For years, I was useful only when things broke. Now that people know I can build systems from the ground up, suddenly everyone has projects for me. Suddenly everyone needs me. Suddenly I'm valuable. Claire, that's not what this is. It is exactly what this is. And for the first time in a very long time, I hung up on my mother. My hands were shaking after the call. Not because I was scared, because I had finally stopped pretending. The next morning, I walked into the office and found 2 emails waiting for me. One was from Daniel. The other was from my mother. Daniel's email was short. Need to discuss a major expansion issue. Come by my office at 10. My mother's was longer, dramatic, and full of capital letters in the way only a guilty parent can manage. She apologized for the misunderstanding and said the family was so proud of me and only wanted what was best. Then, halfway down the email, she added the real point. Jason could really use your advice. I stared at the screen and actually laughed. It was so predictable it bordered on performance art. I deleted the email. Then I went to Daniel's office. He looked up when I entered and immediately noticed my face. What happened? I sank into the chair across from him. My family remembered I exist. He leaned back. That sounds dangerous. It is. He gave me a small smile, then slid a folder toward me. We have a problem. I opened it. Inside were internal reports, network diagnostics, and transaction anomaly logs. I frowned. This is bad. It's worse than bad, he said. Someone has been probing our infrastructure from the inside. My eyes sharpened instantly. Attack vector? Not a direct breach yet. More like reconnaissance. Careful, layered, suspiciously familiar. Our security team flagged it yesterday. I flipped through the logs faster. The patterns were elegant. Too elegant. This was not random noise. Whoever was doing it understood systems architecture well enough to avoid obvious tripwires. I looked up. Who's handling this? Daniel's jaw tightened. That's the issue. We think it may be tied to a former vendor group. I frowned. Former vendor group? He nodded. The subcontractor network that originally handled part of your earlier work. Someone may have retained pieces of your design documents. My stomach went cold. My old consulting layer. The one I had trusted? The one I had used years ago when I was still being paid through a middleman because nobody wanted to hire a woman like me directly until the work made them look smart. Do you think it's theft? I asked. I think it's either theft, negligence, or both. I looked back down at the folder, and there, hidden in the metadata, was something that made my blood run even colder. A naming convention. A structure token. Something I had invented myself. Something I had used only in my original internal documentation. Someone had copied my architecture. Not just copied it. Reused it. And they had been sloppy enough to leave fingerprints. I looked up slowly. Daniel, I said, this wasn't just retained. This was lifted. His face hardened. You're sure? I'm certain. He nodded once. Then I need you involved. I felt a strange calm settle over me. This was the work. This was the thing I knew how to do. Not family drama. Not social performance. Not being introduced like a surprise accessory at dinner parties. This. Truth. Pattern. Risk. Response. Give me access, I said. Daniel did not hesitate. Done. For the next 72 hours, I lived inside the architecture. Not literally, of course, but emotionally, absolutely. I worked with the security team, mapped the anomalies, traced the access chains, and isolated the compromised layer. And the deeper I went, the more convinced I became that this was not just an external probe. Someone had help. Someone inside the company had been careless enough to expose pathways that should have stayed sealed. Or worse, someone had intentionally opened them. I did not sleep much. I drank too much coffee. I forgot what day it was. And during the entire process, my phone would not stop buzzing. My mother called 3 times. Jason called twice. Dana texted a paragraph with no punctuation asking whether I could possibly spare a minute to look at her fiancé's laptop because it was acting strange again. I ignored all of it. The only person I answered was Daniel. At 2:14 a.m., on the 3rd night, I sent him a message. I found the entry point. He replied within a minute. Come to the office. So I did. The city outside was dark, but the executive floor was lit like a surgical theater. Daniel was already there with his chief security officer, Mara, and 2 engineers from the incident response team. I laid my tablet on the table and projected the findings. The room went silent as I walked them through the breach path. This is the weak layer, I said, tapping the screen. Not the firewall itself. The service dependency behind it. Someone knew exactly where to make the system look stable while quietly testing the edges. Mara leaned forward. Can you identify the actor? Not yet, I said. But I can tell you this wasn't amateur work. Whoever did this understood my architecture well enough to mimic the original deployment logic. Daniel frowned. Your architecture? I nodded. Yes, mine. That made the room very still. Then I continued, but there's one thing they missed. I zoomed in on a specific sequence. This conditional failsafe here? It was never in the public design docs. I added it during the final build because I didn't trust the original vendor chain. Mara's brows lifted. And nobody else would know that? Only someone who had access to my private notes or sat beside me during the final deployment. Daniel stared at the screen, then at me. Are you saying one of our vendors copied your private architecture? I'm saying they copied enough of it to think they could impersonate the design without understanding the philosophy behind it. He exhaled slowly. Then he asked the question I had already been dreading. Can we prove it? I looked at the screen again, then said, yes. And that was the moment everything changed. The next morning, we set the trap. Not a dramatic movie trap with flashing lights and dramatic music. A real one. Quiet. Precise. Boring. To everyone, except the people who know that the right kind of boring is how you keep a billion-dollar system alive. We built a decoy layer. a false environment. A controlled pathway that looked like a high-value opportunity but recorded every touch. Whoever had been poking around would think they had found a new access route. They would not know they were walking into a camera room. By evening, the system lit up. One of the suspect credentials touched the decoy, then another, then a third. And then, right there in the trace, was the signature of the consulting team that had handled my old subcontract. Mara looked at me. You were right. I did not feel triumphant. I felt angry, because I knew what this meant. Not just that someone had stolen from me. It meant someone had built a business model out of my work while erasing my name from it. That kind of theft is not only financial. It is personnel. It is identity theft wrapped in a suit. Daniel closed the file and stood up. We're bringing legal in. I nodded. And I want the audit trail preserved, I said. Every access log, every communication, every version history. If they try to bury this, we need a clean forensic chain. He looked at me with something close to admiration. Then he said, You know, I keep waiting for the moment when you sound overwhelmed. I gave him a tired look. I was overwhelmed 3 years ago. Now I'm just annoyed. That made him smile. It was the first real laugh I'd had in days. The legal team moved fast, faster than I expected. By the end of the week, we had enough to issue formal notices. The subcontractor company tried to deny everything at first. Then they tried to claim it was industry standard design language. Then they tried to say the documentation had been collaborative. All of which would have sounded more convincing if they hadn't also tried to delete a set of old permissions logs. That mistake sealed it. When their deletion attempts were recovered, the names attached to the files made my jaw clench. Not just former vendors. One of them belonged to a senior consultant who had once taken credit publicly for a system he helped modernize. A system I had built. I remembered him now. Smooth voice. Expensive shoes. The kind of man who shook hands too firmly and talked about innovation as if it had personally returned his calls. He had stood in a room years ago and nodded, while other people praised him for work he had barely understood. And I had been there, in the background, quiet, invisible, as always. Now his name sat inside a forensic report like a confession. Daniel called me into his office before the official meeting. You should know, he said. The board is preparing to make this public. I crossed my arms. Good. They also want to protect the company's reputation. I know. They may try to frame this as a vendor compliance issue. I looked at him. Will it be true? He held my gaze. No, that was enough for me. Because Daniel was many things. But a coward was not one of them. Then tell the truth, I said. He nodded. That's what I intend to do. The board meeting was the most stressful hour of my life. I sat in the back of the room with my notes while executives argued over language, exposure, public perception, vendor risk, contractual liability, and the usual polished nonsense people use when they're trying to avoid saying theft out loud. Then Daniel stood up. He looked around the table and said, very calmly, We are not calling this a misunderstanding. We are calling it what it is. Nobody spoke, he continued. An external vendor chain used confidential architecture without authorization. The original system was designed by Claire Whitmore. At my name, several heads turned. He did not stop. She was not a contributor. She was not a junior support engineer. She was the architect. The company's stability depended on her work, and we are not allowing that work to be erased for the convenience of people who failed to respect it. I felt my throat tighten, because nobody had ever spoken about my work that way in a room that mattered. Not my family, not my relatives, not the neighbors, not the people who used my labor every time they asked me to rescue their technology and then acted like I was just handy. Daniel turned toward me. Claire, would you like to address the board? Every instinct in my body screamed no. Not because I wasn't capable, Because I knew how these rooms worked. They loved to hear a woman speak when she was being useful. They were less comfortable when she was being undeniable. Still, I stood. I walked to the front, and I said, the architecture was designed to be resilient against failure, fraud, and scale. It was also designed with one principle in mind. If a system depends on invisible labor, that labor still matters even when nobody is applauding it. The room was still. I kept going. Someone thought they could use my work without my name because they assumed the work itself would be enough to hide the theft. But the work is the proof. The work is the signature. And the truth is very simple. If you build on someone else's mind and erase their name, that is not innovation. That is theft. Nobody interrupted me. And for once, I didn't shrink at the silence. I stood in it, owned it. Then I sat back down, and that meeting changed everything. The board approved a full disclosure. My name was restored to the technical records. The vendor relationship was terminated. A public correction was issued, and within days, industry publications began doing what industry publications love most: discovering a previously overlooked woman after she has already done the work. I was invited to speak on panels. Tech outlets requested interviews. Universities asked me to guest lecture. A venture group even tried to recruit me for a leadership role. My mother, of course, read all of it. And suddenly she wanted coffee. Not a phone call, a meeting. At a restaurant downtown, I almost said no, but something in me wanted one final conversation. One final look at the woman who had spent so many years making me feel like a guest in my own life. So I went. She arrived 15 minutes early, dressed carefully, smiling too hard. "Claire," she said, rising to hug me. I gave her a brief embrace because I'm not a monster. We sat down. She took a breath. "I just want you to know I'm proud of you." There it was. The line she had rehearsed. I nodded. "Okay. I should have understood sooner how important your work was." "Yes," I said. She looked startled by how little I was offering. Then she rushed on. "I was just trying to protect you from disappointment." I laughed softly. "From what? Becoming successful?" "No, honey, from people being jealous." "Mom," I said, setting my water glass down. "You didn't protect me. You minimized me." She flinched, and I kept going, because I had earned the right to finish the sentence. "You told people not to brag about me. You reduced my career to computer help. You let the family treat me like a service line. And now that other people respect my work, you want to step into the story as if you always knew my worth." Her eyes filled, but I did not soften. "I needed you to believe in me before the applause," I said. The table went quiet. Then she whispered, "I didn't know how." I looked at her for a long moment. Then I said the hardest thing I had ever said to her: "That is not the same as not hurting me." That sentence stayed between us like a wall. She cried a little. I did not. Not because I didn't feel it. Because I had already cried enough over this family to last several lifetimes. After lunch, I walked out into the sunlight and felt, for the first time, completely free. Not healed. Not finished. Free. And there is a difference. Freedom is not when everyone suddenly understands you. Freedom is when their misunderstanding stops controlling your life. I did not need my mother to become a different person overnight. I did not need Jason to suddenly become responsible. I did not need Dana to stop being performative. I did not need my father to finally develop emotional vocabulary. What I needed was this. I needed to stop letting their version of me define who I became. And that's what I did. I moved forward. I accepted the executive infrastructure role Daniel offered me. I built a new team. I hired women who had been overlooked the way I had been overlooked. I mentored junior engineers who were brilliant and insecure in all the ways young talent often is. I started saying my own name clearly in rooms that used to ignore me. Claire Whitmore. Not the tech girl. Not the family support line. Not the daughter they forgot to brag about. Claire Whitmore. Architect. Leader. Builder. The woman who designed the systems people depended on without ever knowing her face. And one day while I was leaving the office, Daniel walked beside me to the elevator and said, "You know, your mother was wrong." I glanced at him. "About which part?" He smiled slightly. "About bragging." I laughed, despite myself. He continued, "Some people think modesty means shrinking. It doesn't. Real modesty is doing important work without needing to insult yourself while you do it." I looked at him, then said, "That sounds annoyingly wise." I contain many annoyingly wise qualities. That made me laugh harder than it should have. The elevator doors opened. At first, I thought the hardest part was over. I thought the public correction, the board meeting, the apology from my mother, and the formal restoration of my name would be enough to close the wound. But life does not always end a chapter when you think it should. Sometimes it waits. Sometimes it tests whether you have truly changed, or whether you are just standing straighter while carrying the same pain. That test came 2 months later, and it came from my family again. Of course it did. By then I had settled into my new role fully. My office had a view of the city. My team ran like a machine I trusted, and my calendar was packed with design reviews, security audits, and executive strategy calls. I had become the person people in the building came to when the impossible needed a clean answer. The irony was not lost on me. For years, my family thought I was only good for fixing their laptops. Now entire departments waited for my decisions. I should have felt vindicated every second. Some days I did. Other days, I just felt tired. Because success does not erase old grief. It just gives it better lighting. That morning, I was on a conference call when my assistant buzzed me. "Claire," she said, "there's a woman here asking to see you. She says she's your cousin Melissa." I sat up straight. Melissa, the engagement queen. The one who had once dropped her fork when Daniel Harrington mentioned my name. I muted the call. "Did she have an appointment?" "No." I rubbed my forehead. "Of course not. She says it's personal." That meant trouble. "Send her away?" my assistant asked gently. I should have said yes. Instead, I said, "Let her wait in the lobby. I'll come down after this call." When I entered the lobby 10 minutes later, Melissa was sitting stiffly on the edge of a chair, dressed too perfectly for a casual visit and not perfectly enough for a real apology. She stood the second she saw me. "Claire." "Melissa." We looked at each other for a long second. Then she gave a nervous laugh. "You look different." I almost smiled. That's usually what happens when people stop treating me like furniture. Her cheeks flushed. I deserve that. That surprised me. I crossed my arms. "Why are you here?" She swallowed. "Because the family's coming apart." I tilted my head. That is not usually a sentence that gets me to offer refreshments. She hesitated, then said, "Your mother asked me to talk to you." That made my stomach tighten. "About what?" "About the dinner next week." I frowned. "What dinner?" Melissa gave me a look. "The one they didn't tell you about yet." My entire body went still. "What dinner?" She exhaled. "They're planning a family celebration. Your father's retirement, your mother's birthday, my engagement, and, apparently, a special recognition for you." I stared at her. A celebration for me, at my family's house, without telling me. That sounded less like recognition and more like a trap in a silk napkin. I'm listening, I said slowly. Melissa shifted uncomfortably. Your mother wants to surprise you. Why? Because she thinks it will fix things. I gave a sharp little laugh. And does she? Melissa looked down. No. There was honesty there. At least. I appreciated that. What exactly is she planning? I asked. Melissa hesitated again. A speech. Maybe a toast. Some family friends. A few people from the neighborhood. She said she wants everyone to know how proud she is of you now. Now. I let that word sit between us. Now. After I had already built the system. After the public exposure, after the board acknowledgement, after the interviews and the career changes and the money and the name. Now she wanted to be proud. I nodded once. Tell her thank you, I said. Melissa blinked. That's it? That's it. She looked confused. You're coming? I gave her a small smile that I did not feel. Oh, I'm coming. The night of the celebration, I stood in front of my mirror for a long time. I chose a black dress with clean lines. Elegant, but not loud. No excessive jewelry. No dramatic makeup. I wanted to walk in as myself, not as a performance of success. When I looked at my reflection, I didn't see the girl they had dismissed. I saw the woman who had survived being dismissed. That was different. That was stronger. When I arrived, the house was full. Of course it was. My mother loved an audience almost as much as she loved control. The living room had been transformed into a polished event space, complete with flowers, catered trays, and soft music that sounded expensive and emotionally dishonest. Guests turned as I entered. Some recognized me immediately from the articles. Some did not. My mother did. She rushed over to me with too much energy and too much perfume. Claire, she said, clutching my hands. You came. I looked at her carefully. You invited me. She laughed too quickly. Yes, of course, I just wanted it to be special. Special. That word again. I glanced around. Jason was near the bar, looking uncomfortable in a blazer. Dana was posing with her fiancé like they were in a lifestyle magazine. My father stood near the fireplace, solemn and distant as ever. Melissa hovered near the stairs, clearly regretting every life decision that had brought her here. And then I saw him. Daniel. He was standing near the back of the room, talking quietly to my father. I stopped walking. My mother followed my eyes and panicked instantly. Oh yes, Daniel is here too. He said he wanted to support you. I slowly turned toward her. You invited him? She smiled in the way people smile right before they admit to a strategic lie. Well, yes. I thought it would be nice. I almost laughed. Nice. That word had done enough damage in my life. Daniel caught my eye across the room and gave me a small, unreadable look. Not a warning exactly, more like a heads up that something was in motion. I did not like that, not one bit. The room settled after everyone had arrived. My mother tapped a glass with a spoon. The sound echoed through the living room. All right, everyone, she said brightly. We're so happy to have you all here tonight. We have a lot to celebrate. I stood near the center of the room, already sensing what was coming. She continued, Our family has been through a lot, and sometimes it takes a little time for people to fully appreciate what they have. I narrowed my eyes. This was not a toast. This was a performance. My mother looked directly at me. Claire, come here, sweetheart. I did not move immediately. Every instinct in my body told me this was not going to be warm, genuine, or simple. Still, I walked forward. She took both my hands and turned to the guests. Many of you knew Claire as the quiet one, the one who preferred computers to conversation. A few polite smiles. She squeezed my hand with the exact amount of pressure you use when you want to seem affectionate while actually steering a scene. But what many of you did not know is that Claire has become an extraordinary woman. She has built remarkable systems. She has impressed important people, and she has made our family very proud. I felt my jaw tighten. Very proud. The way she said it made it sound like she had raised